All right, good evening, everyone. And thank you all for joining us. My name is Alyssa Karpenka, and I'm the event coordinator for McNally Robinson Booksellers in Saskatoon. This event is coming to you from Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. I'll just note that this event is being live streamed, so please be aware of the webcam to your right. I'd also like to take this moment to encourage you to silence your phones for the duration of the event. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the Saskatoon launch of A Burden of Love by Heather Hataley. Thank you to Heather for being here tonight and for working with us to create this event. Heather is the author of 2 new adult dystopian fiction novels, but she enjoys writing in a variety of genres. Her work is best enjoyed by the emotionally curious reader. Her passion for reading, writing, and learning more about the human condition led her to earning a Bachelor of Arts in English and a minor in history at the University of Saskatchewan. When she's not writing, Heather is a group fitness and music instructor and volunteers in her local performing arts community. She resides in Saskatoon with her husband, child, and dog. I'll now turn things over to Heather. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hello, thanks, Alyssa. I wanted to start with some thank yous. So thank you to McNally Robinson for providing this space for us to host this event. I'm really excited to be able to celebrate my book tonight. Thanks to my dad told me I had to thank my parents. So. Thanks to my mom and dad for supporting my love of reading and writing. I have a vivid memory of you guys taking me to an awards ceremony for a short story contest I entered in the 8th grade. So thanks for doing stuff like that. Thanks to my brother and sister for their sometimes brutally honest feedback on my early drafts. I want to thank every school teacher I had for giving us a creative writing assignment that just fueled my love of this art. Thanks to all my friends that I convinced to beta read or edit or read some ARC copies of my book. And thanks to my husband for supporting this dream and all the time and effort it takes. And thanks to all of you guys for coming. I'm so excited to see all your faces. So, A Burden of Love. This is the 2nd book in the Collection of Scars trilogy. My idea for this trilogy came to me over 10 years ago. And the first little bit of writing I did for it was for a creative writing class back in high school, which was also over 10 years ago. So this book's been a long time in the making, and I didn't really get serious about writing it until 2019. And then we all know what happened in 2020. That was a chance, lockdown was a chance for me to get a lot of writing in, get a lot of editing in, get a lot of learning in. I'm a self-published author, so I had a lot to learn about like ISBNs and pricing and royalties and consignment and book marketing and what formatting a book is and how much I really don't want to learn how to do that. But knowing all that stuff the second time around made publishing this guy a lot easier. It was also a lot harder because I had an infant at the time. But I had so much fun writing A Burden of Love in particular because it's everything I love about A Collection of Scars, which is book 1, but it's just more. I've had a lot of fun really digging into the Yonah and Naris relationship and the new dynamic that they have in book 2. A Burden of Love is a little more plot driven than book 1, so it moved a lot faster and I got to play with new characters and settings, so it was so much fun writing this book. But it's still similar to book 1 in that it's really filled with a lot of emotional tension and this really icky relationship that I'm having fun exploring. So I wanted to do a reading for you because some of you haven't read book 2 yet. I thought I'd maybe start with the first part of the prologue for a reading today. If you haven't read book 1, I'm sorry, there's a spoiler in here. Should have read book 1. Okay. I'm gonna have some water first. Okay. The wedding ceremony would take place that evening at the back of the palace on the very patio where Yonah and Naris spent so much of their time. The very patio where Yonah had first seen Naris's violent temper. Until then, however, she had no intention of leaving her room for fear of running into one of their guests. The guests, the masters, were already watching her with suspicion. Their first impressions of her were lukewarm at best. The bedroom door opened, causing the cat sitting on Yonah's lap to stir, and a woman several years older than Yonah's 20 swept in, carrying a small tray of food. I brought you something to get you through until dinner. She set the tray on a table. Have you been hiding here all day? The woman's name was Praha, and she had been serving Yonah since Naris brought her to the palace. I didn't want to talk to anyone, Yonah replied, not even Naris. She didn't want to let anything she said put any thoughts of backing out into Naris's head. It would be best for her to stay out of everyone's way until the ceremony, at which point any objections or second thoughts would have to be public and potentially reputation-ruining choices. She pulled Saza the cat back onto her lap. Praha pursed her lips. Both you and the master, I'm surprised you even bothered to invite these people. It's clear that... She stopped suddenly. Yonah finished the thought. That Naris doesn't like them, and none of them like me. With a shrug, Praha said, we all know what happened the last time there was a gathering here. Naris had tried so hard to prove to Yonah that she would be accepted by the masters as his guest, despite the collar she wore that marked her as his slave. His attempts to convince the masters had been futile, so much so that one master, Xanath, had assaulted Yonah and received a swift punch to the face from Naris. He wants to be the head of one of the most respected families in the upper class, Yonah replied, even if that means spending time with people he doesn't like. Praha shook her head and sighed. Let's do your hair first. She opened a drawer and removed a brush, pins, and an orange ribbon. She then picked up a chair and placed it in front of the full-length mirror that hung from one of the bedroom walls. Sit. Yonah stood from the chaise she had been reclined in. Saza landed gracefully on the floor and sprang onto the bed, where she curled up into a little black ball, and she sat in front of Praha. As Praha braided her hair, Yonah took a moment to take in her reflection. Her long dark hair was unkempt after the previous night. She had dull brown eyes, a square chin, and a forehead lined with wrinkles that made her look older than she was. Her eyes rested on the pink scar in the center of her bottom lip. Naris had done that to her. Her gaze drifted to the scar on her right arm. A member of the guard had done that to her. The farther along into the dressing process Yonah went, the more her nerves shook. She watched her transformation in the mirror as Praha did her hair and applied her makeup. From slave to master she went, although she was still wearing the copper collar that marked her enslavement. Slavery was the new justice system institutionalized by President Alfu, the man who had taken over Harasa after the coup. It was enforced by a group of men and women who policed the country known as the Guard. Yonah had been enslaved when she and her 2 siblings were found living on the streets. Orphans were enslaved until their 20th birthday. Yonah kept sliding the palms of her hands down the tops of her thighs as if wiping her nerves away. Her chest felt too small for her pounding heart. She exhaled loudly through rounded lips. Praha gave Yonah a sideways glance through the mirror before them. Why are you marrying him? It wasn't the first time Praha had questioned Yonah's motives for marrying their shared master. Each time, Yonah replied with as vague a response as she could give. Because, Yonah said, it will make things easier. That's not true, Praha said, sounding bored. You know that, I know that. Maybe I can tell you once I'm free, but that's just it, Yonah. Praha's eyes were alight with a challenge. You won't be free after you marry Naris, never. Yes, that was the sacrifice she was making. In order to make their entrances to the ceremony, Yonah and Naris would ride in separate carriages from the front of the estate to the back, at which point they would walk up the vineyard to the rear courtyard. A new gravel path had been built for the occasion. Praha walked down to the front of the palace with Yonah, staying a few steps behind her. When she stepped through the front doors, Yonah saw her friend Sidon stroking one of the horse's long faces. As the stable master, he was very familiar with each animal. When he noticed Yonah's arrival, he turned to face her. His age-lined face opened into one of surprised awe. The look sent a wave of embarrassed gratitude through Yonah. Yonah, the aging stable master said. He gave her a tight-lipped smile. You look very grown up. Do I look like a master? Besides the collar? Sidon looked her over. You look like a lady. Maybe that would be enough for the masters to accept her as their own. You'd best hop in, Sidon said, nodding his head towards the second carriage. Master Naris hasn't come down yet, and you shouldn't see each other before it all starts. Sidon opened the carriage door for Yonah and took her hand to help her inside. Praha helped make sure Yonah's dress and floor-length veil were tucked inside before the door was shut. Inside the velvet-lined carriage, Yonah sat in a hushed silence that made her feel suddenly very alone. The linen curtains were drawn across the windows so Yonah and Naris wouldn't see each other until the ceremony began. Yonah ran her fingertips over the orange satin edge of her otherwise white sheer veil. It was fastened to her head with a silver circlet that sat on top. She could feel the gems that hung from the top edge of the veil bump against her forehead every time she moved. There was a brisk voice outside the carriage. Yonah paused for a moment, knowing she should wait until the ceremony, but she drew the curtain back ever so slightly and peeked outside. She only caught a glimpse of him as he strode out of her sightline. He was a lean and powerful blur of navy and white. Yonah sat back in her seat and brought her hand to the copper ring around her neck. That would be off soon. She would be married to a master and released from her servitude. Then the real work could begin. Her nerves knotted her skin from the inside. Just as Yonah wished she could stand up and walk around to shake them away, the carriage started to move. It was happening. Yonah knew they were driving around the outside of the estate to the back, but with the curtains closed, she could only imagine what the view might look like from this new path. She pressed her white dress flat against her body and adjusted the skirt over her legs. Naris would be upset if anything about her outfit wasn't perfect with so many of the other masters watching. The carriage came to a stop. Yonah waited for any other movement, sounds, or signals as to what was happening. Gentle violin music came floating through the air, accompanied by a guitar. Although the song had a soothing quality, it marked the start of the ceremony, which set Yonah's breath shaking. There came the gentle snap of a carriage door opening and closing. Naris was making his way down the aisle among the guests to the patio. After a few moments, the door to her own carriage opened, and Yonah stepped out. She blinked at the bright sunlight. Hundreds of faces turned to look at her. The sudden attention made Yonah want to shrink back into the safety of the carriage for a brief moment, but she steeled herself, pulled her chest upwards, held her head high, and took up her space. She would not be a blushing and timid bride. She would not be the shamefaced slave they had all met months ago. She was more than that. Naris was standing on the patio, a couple steps higher than the guests. His figure was imposing in his navy jacket laced with silver decoration. But he was always imposing, always taking up space, always exuding the confidence of a predator. Yonah noticed that his fingers were shimmering with rings. He didn't normally wear jewelry. Neither did Yonah, but she wore several armlets, bangles, and large hoop earrings with deep blue stones hanging in the center. Through all the pomp and performance, Yonah saw sincerity in Naris's golden brown eyes. He looked at her with love. It was a flawed love, but it was love nonetheless. That look brought both serenity and guilt to Yonah. She was walking down the aisle around the large stone fountain. She wasn't sure where to put her hands and hoped she didn't look too awkward. There was a variety of expressions on the guests in attendance. Many were stoically watchful. Some appeared to be genuinely enjoying themselves. Others narrowed their eyes in judgment at Yonah. As Yonah started up the steps to the top of the patio, Naris grinned. He held his hand out to his sister. When she took it, she felt it shaking ever so slightly. She looked at Naris's face in search of anything that revealed a nervousness or fear, but she saw only his mask of confidence. A magistrate dressed in a cream-colored robe cleared his throat and began to speak. Yonah didn't listen very closely to the magistrate. She was too busy trying to keep her face calm. The Naris was reciting his vows while he fastened a long white beaded necklace around Yonah's neck. He carefully maneuvered around her veil and ensured the necklace was straight as he pulled away. The magistrate handed Yonah a similar necklace in black beads and asked her to repeat after him. She tried not to let her voice shake. I, Yonah, do wed thee, Naris. In marriage, I bind my body with your body, my mind with your mind, and my spirit with your spirit. We are both one and two beings. As one, we stand by each other, support each other, care for each other, and love each other. This I swear to do. Yonah placed the necklace over Naris's head and laid it gently on his shoulders. Their eyes caught, tangled in a moment suspended in time. Yonah's breath stopped as she looked at Naris's handsome face and charming smile. She knew more so than anyone how fast that face could turn. She stepped away, returning to her place. They were instructed to clasp hands and walk around the magistrate to symbolize their parallel journey through life together. As they turned, Yonah's foot got caught up in her veil and she tripped. There was a moment of weightlessness as Yonah lost her footing, followed by the sudden stability of Naris grabbing her elbows and holding her steady. She searched Naris's eyes for any displeasure, but there was only care there. Embarrassed for her lack of grace in front of the masters, Yonah rushed through the rest of the circle, neglecting to retrieve Naris's hand, and returned to her place in front of the magistrate, casting her eyes down with self-loathing. Naris followed and took Yonah's hand in his own. With these promises you've sworn today, the magistrate said, you bind yourself together in matrimony in the eyes of your community and the government of Harasa. The magistrate frowned briefly at Yonah. As you are now partners in life, you, Yonah, are immediately free from your servitude to Naris and the government of Harasa. Yonah's heart swelled with anticipation. She tried to keep her face impassive, mindful of the watchful masters. The magistrate took a step back and nodded to a guard. The guard, the body that policed all of Harasa in the search for orphan children, criminals, disabled people, and rebels to enslave, had plagued Yonah ever since the coup 10 years ago. This guard carried a long tool with two wooden handles and a rounded metal end. He pulled the handles apart, and the rounded end opened like the mouth of a beast. Yonah fought her panic as the guard came towards her with the tool and wrapped the metal ends around her rounded copper collar. She glanced at Naris, but while he wore a nervous expression, he didn't look alarmed. There came a thick crack and movement from Yonah's collar that made her squint her eyes shut. She wished he hadn't. The masters were watching her. She forced her eyes open again. It seemed her collar wasn't quite broken. The guard adjusted the tool's hold on the collar and pressed the handles together again. This time, the collar broke and clattered to the stone patio. Yonah's eyes followed its fall. As she stared at the now useless metal next to her feet, her hand went up to her throat, her bare neck, unburdened by that awful mark of slavery. She was free. Yonah looked up at Naris. He didn't smile as before, but his face was clear. He nodded once slowly at Yonah as if to say, I promised you I would set you free. I held up my end of the agreement. And now he expected Yonah to hold up her end. The magistrate stepped forward. I present to you Naris and Yonah Murin. They both reached for the other's hand and turned to face their guests. There was polite applause. Yonah felt as if she could float away. She was a free woman. All of these people had witnessed her release. She was one of their peers now. She was a master. And that's the last. Thank you. And do a trilogy for my coffee fit. If anyone has any questions for me, I have some time to answer those if you want. Are there any questions? Yes.
What did you find to be the most challenging aspect of writing this book?
Most challenging aspect. Right now, all I can think was that it was just really fun to write. I don't know. This was a lot easier for me to write than a collection of scars. A collection of scars, there was a lot of revisions that happened, a lot of piecing together the plot and adding and taking things out. This one, I drew up an outline and it kind of came together a lot easier than the first book. Yeah.
Do you know where you're going from here in the next one?
I have an idea. Yes, yes. I know how I want it to end. I don't know how we get there, which is a really bad idea. I like to joke that I'm just gonna George R.R. Martin it. Yeah. Any other questions? Hi, Dan.
I'm curious about your high school, what got put in your high school file, and sort of when you came across that, what sort of went, okay, this is it? Or
Yeah.
out of everything else you could have written about, what drew you to that?
I think the story was always in the back of my mind. So what I wrote in my high school creative writing class it ended up being the prologue to a collection of scars. And I think that was always in the back of my mind for many years. And it's like, I should write that book. I should write that book. And finally there just came a point where I was like, if I have to write it to write it, so I should do that. I don't know if that answers your questions. Thank you. There's a question back there.
Yeah, for it being a sequel and expanding on characters and settings, do you have trouble trying to narrow it enough knowing that you want to be just trilogy and not more?
It's funny because this book, A Collection of Scars, was supposed to be a standalone. And then I finished it and I was like, people are going to be really mad that I don't keep going because folks are nodding. And then I got halfway through A Burden of Love and I thought, uh-oh, this is a trilogy. And I really don't want it to turn into more than that. I'm going to try really hard to keep it to 3. So, I mean, yeah, I can't make any promises. But I'm definitely advertising it as a trilogy. I want it to wrap up in the next book. I think it will. I think that's what'll happen. Probably. Thanks. Are there any other questions out there? Yeah.
Fascinating names. Where did the names of the characters come from?
I like to use other languages and be like, what's the language for friend in this language? And then I turn it into a name that sounds nice enough to my ear. Yeah. So I've been using a little bit of Italian for some of these names and kind of twisting the letters around into something. Yeah. Or sometimes the only other name in here that actually means anything is Poseidon is the stable master, and I just stole that from Poseidon, the god of the sea. That's my only clever one.
So you said you had an outline. Does that mean you write linearly? Or do you do scenes and then figure out a way to have them get from one scene to the other and stitch it together?
I write typically linearly, although this takes me back to the hardest part of this book was going back to revise and realizing I have a spot in my rough draft that says, and then something like this happens. I'm not done writing it. But I typically like to write front to end because I drift away from the outline and I like to have the space to do that. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
Do you have a favorite author? And if you do, who is it?
Oh my gosh, that changes all the time. Favorite author. You know what? A couple summers ago, I had a really great time reading through Saba Tahir's quartet, An Ember in the Ashes. I just thought she created such a intricate, interesting world, and the story itself was good, but then like her actual wordsmithery was really beautiful as well. I was like, this is just such an amazing writer. So right now it's Saba to here. We'll see how long. Well, if that's it for questions, you can ask me something else in private if you want. Also, I'll be here for a little bit, but that's it for me. I'll give you the mic. Sure. Thanks, everybody.
All right, I'll just say a quick word before I let you meet Heather. I'd like to thank her again for being with us tonight. We have copies of A Burden of Love on the desk to your right back there. And if you'd like your copy signed, or if you'd like to say hello, of course, Heather will be happy to meet you up here at the signing table. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.